Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hey everyone, it's Malika Bilal, and I am coming to you from Web Summit Qatar here in Doha, Qatar. We are bringing you two special episodes this week and next, straight from the Web Summit floor. Our first is with journalist and former Al Jazeera colleague, Ayman Mohyeldin, now of MSNOW. We talk about the landscape of journalism and so much more. Enjoy. Thank you so much for being here. Ayman, thank you for being here. Hello and welcome. So my name is Malika Bilal, as you heard. I'm the host of The Take. And we are here, as you know, live on stage at the Web Summit Qatar in Doha. So for those of you who don't know, The Take is Al Jazeera's daily flagship news podcast. We air wherever podcasts can be found. And in 2024, we believe, by our account, we became the first daily news podcast to publish 5 days a week in video.
Wow.
Yeah. But this is our first ever live recording. And so I'm really excited to be doing it with Ayman Mohyeldin and with all of you here in Doha. So today we're going to talk about platforming the truth. And there is no one I would rather have that conversation with than Ayman. So Ayman, welcome to The Take. Thank you so much for being here.
And Malika, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and have this conversation. Very important and very timely.
So for the handful of people who do not know your work, how would you introduce yourself in 1 or 2 sentences?
I guess in the simplest form, I'm the host of The Weekend Primetime, which is a show on the American cable news channel MSNOW. I was a field correspondent for the better part of my career as a correspondent, as a journalist. Before that, I was a producer. So I like to say now I'm a recovering journalist, and now I work in the opinion space. So I get to express more of my opinions and more perspective than just purely reporting. Mm-hmm. That's more than 1 or 2 sentences, by the way.
I like it. You're a journalist. I expected as much. Okay, so you have been covering international and U.S. news for 25 years, starting as a desk assistant at NBC News in the U.S. and eventually joining Al Jazeera English here in Doha in 2006. But I want to start with a moment when I believe you became a household name for many people around the world, and that was 15 years ago when you were covering the uprisings in Egypt and were being beamed into the households of millions of viewers.
You're the first Egyptian I've spoken to since this happened. A personal question for you, a moment. You've been there throughout this, all of the 18 days. I want you to stop being impartial for a moment, because your reporting has been exemplary all the way through. Give me your personal feeling as to what you're seeing there now in Cairo tonight.
Well, you know, Adrian, as somebody who spent a lot of time growing up here in Egypt, and you've seen the sacrifices that have been made by so many people over the years.
It has been, I don't know if you can believe this, but it has been 15 years since the fall of Mubarak.
I have the gray hairs to prove it.
Right.
Yes, it's been.
So you brought us that story, much of it at least, from this exclusive, now iconic live shot overlooking Tahrir Square. And there's a story behind how you got that shot. Do you recall? How did you get it? Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, first of all, it was definitely not something that I did by myself. I mean, it's very important to remember that even if you are the journalist or the correspondent who's reporting on any given specific moment of that revolution, there really was an incredible team of journalists behind the scenes who made that happen. It was clear in the early days of the Arab Spring, and certainly the protests in Egypt, that Tahrir Square was going to be the epicenter of the protests, both for symbolic reasons, but also for practical reasons. It was probably the only space in downtown Cairo that could have millions of people gathered. And so for us, it was a no-brainer that we needed to find a way to make sure that we can get a live signal from inside that square. Because we knew from the first couple of days of the protest that there was this discrepancy between what the government was saying and what Egyptian state broadcasting was saying, which was that it's small, there's not a lot of protesters, everything is peaceful, and they were showing like a very specific angle in their camera shot versus what we were able to see with our own eyes. And so I think maybe by the third day or fourth day, that Friday, January the 28th, the Friday that they called the Day of Anger, we went to Tahrir Square and we managed to get to a building where we basically just knocked on a resident's door. And I said to him, the protesters were gathering, and I said, do you want to make television history? And he was incredible in the sense that he said yes, and he gave us access to his roof. We set up our camera position there, and I think for the rest of the 15 days or so, from February 11th, up until February 11th, we were able to broadcast live from Tahrir Square because we managed to get our camera on the roof of this building overlooking the square throughout all the protests.
So he did make television history.
He did.
There's a little detail that I love from this story, and it's how you knew he probably was going to say yes because he was wearing a T-shirt. Do you remember the T-shirt?
Of course. So what happened was, I didn't know how much details you wanted, but I remember the story vividly. No, I walked into the building. I went up all the way to the top floor of the building. I knocked on the door. And the gentleman opened the door, and he was wearing a Che Guevara T-shirt. And because he was wearing a Che Guevara T-shirt, I instinctively thought to myself, this guy was a revolutionary at heart. And I said to him, do you want to make television history? And he let me in. And unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago.
So you stayed in touch?
Yes. His name is Pierre. He was very well known in Cairo, had an amazing apartment overlooking Tahrir Square. But unfortunately, Pierre passed away.
Well, thank you for sharing his name and for sharing that story, because it's that tenacity. It's you and your team knocking on that door, asking that question that has shaped so much of your reporting over the years. And it's exactly why you are the person that I want to ask this next question to. So it's a little bit of a soul-searching question about our industry.
Okay.
I'm prefacing here to get you ready. Right now, there is so much happening, right? I think we know that. To list a few, there's these explosive allegations about prominent world leaders and officials and their alleged ties to the late convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein. There's the deadly crackdown on people in the U.S. by federal immigration officers. And if people follow you specifically, they will know that there's news out that Israel appeared to accept the death toll in Gaza of the Palestinians, the 70,000 Palestinians killed during this genocidal war. So this is some really big news. And yet, with some exceptions, I think there's a lot of criticism that our profession is not meeting the moment. We're not connecting the dots. And you are someone who does just that. People respect you because you do connect the dots. And so I'm wondering what you think of our industry and why they're not able to do that. Why you seem to be this fish that's kind of swimming upstream.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I mean, anytime anyone tries to put into the conversation new ideas and new context and try to spotlight things that normally don't get a lot of coverage, it is a bit of a challenge. But I do want to note that there are a tremendous amount of journalists who do incredible work in Gaza, in the United States, in Iran. I think that's also a very important story that is happening right now against unbelievable and insurmountable challenges because there isn't a free press inside Iran. So it's even harder to get a sense of what is happening inside Iran right now if it weren't for brave Iranians who are documenting and showing the world what they've had to endure over the last couple of weeks and months and years, quite frankly. I think our profession is going through seismic changes, and there's a reason why confidence and trust in media and mainstream media in the United States specifically is at an all-time low. I think the world has become much more transparent, and people are able to see things that traditionally or historically they were not able to see. They were able to see for themselves a live stream genocide, and they would see the reality of what is happening on the ground in Gaza versus what they were seeing and reading about on their TV screens. And that disconnect erodes public confidence. And it's not just what happened in Gaza. It happens all the time in the United States. And among the political class and certainly the powerful, there is a growing sense that confidence in these institutions has been eroded because the media has been sometimes reluctant to call things what they are and speak in a plain, simple language to be able to call out things when things are clearly wrong. They certainly do it better on some stories than others, and some stories are more difficult to do that on than others. But for the most part, our society and our politics have become so polarized, and the media has also become polarized. And what people expect out of their media and journalism has sadly changed and evolved. And so as a result of that, people are not necessarily looking for information, they're looking for affirmation. People want to be affirmed of their ideas. People want to be affirmed of their values and their points, as opposed to being exposed to something different and challenged and introduced to new ideas and new stories, or to hear from people that they normally wouldn't hear from. So I try to always ask myself those questions about, perhaps more specifically about things to do with this part of the world, the Middle East, where I have a lot more experience, but also in areas like Ukraine and immigration in the United States. I covered Guatemala and the immigration crisis in the US, and how there's a lot of issues that sometimes overlap, and sometimes the themes in some of these stories overlap, and some of the principles overlap. So I try not to lose sight of those in my reporting and the conversations I have with guests and the way that I approach trying to explain to viewers the complexities of some of these issues.
Well, I wanted your expertise on that, Ayman, because I think if someone looks at your career, it's one of those careers where the bylines of where you've been could read as like a history syllabus, a timeline of really pivotal moments that have happened in recent history, at least in this region. And you listed off a few of the places that you've reported from. So we talked about the so-called Arab Spring. There is you in Gaza, as we mentioned. And what I didn't mention that people should remember is you being one of the only English language news correspondents in Gaza in 2008, along with our then colleague Shireen Tadros, when Israel's siege escalated into this deadly war named Operation Cast Lead. When you think back to your early days reporting in Gaza, what's a moment that even today still sticks with you?
Well, there are a lot of moments that stick with me in terms of events, right? I mean, as you mentioned, Operation Cast Lead, the war in 2008, 2009 was one that stays with me. I think what I walk away from in those moments over covering Gaza in 2 years was more about the people that I met and the resilience of the Palestinian people who had endured years of blockade, on top of years of occupation, on top of years of military strikes, and then a full-blown war in 2008, 2009. And some of the relationships that I made with the people there were the things that will always stay with me forever. And it's always been one of the themes that I find most powerful in all of the stories that I cover is this kind of sense of human resilience. Whether you are in Iraq in 2003 or Ukraine or Guatemala or Gaza, there is a resilience to human beings, and there's a commonality of wanting to live freely and wanting to live peacefully and wanting to offer their kids the best. And when you see that commonality among all these different people from all around the world, you really realize the power of journalism, because you're witnessing it firsthand, but also you realize how disheartening it is when you see how much division and hatred there is in the world. And that makes it very difficult to watch from afar, right? Because you're watching it and you're kind of hearing a narrative in the media that is portraying people, whether it's in the US right now, as we hear in this administration, immigrants are criminals and rapists and murderers. They're violent, versus what we're hearing being described about the people in Gaza, that they're terrorists and they're terrorist sympathizers and they're extremists and all that stuff. And so when you see these narratives that are constantly dominant in a lot of the media discourse, juxtaposed with your own experience on the ground in these places, it's very disheartening.
Yeah. I want to bring up some of your reporting from this current war, Israel's war in Gaza. Because here we are in the midst of a ceasefire, a so-called ceasefire, in which journalists on the ground have said that Israeli fire has not ceased. but they continue to report, even though it is a very dangerous job. Israel has killed nearly 300 journalists and media workers in Gaza over the course of this war. And you knew some of them or their family members personally. So I'm thinking of one interview you did that was quite impactful with Al Jazeera Gaza bureau chief, Wael Dahtou, who lost many family members, including his wife, his son Hamza, who was also an Al Jazeera journalist. And you also knew senior cameraman, Samer Mudaka, who was killed in an Israeli attack that also injured Wael. What are the lessons that you have taken from the journalists in Gaza that you worked with, that you knew, that you know?
I learned a lot. I mean, I learned courage. I learned what it really means to be courage. I learned what it means to be brave. I learned what it means to be selfless. I learned what it means to really believe in a profession. I think of those journalists as true role models for the industry and for the profession. These are people who didn't just talk the talk of how important journalism is. They lived it with every breath that they took and with all the sacrifices that they made. They truly believe that the power of journalism is to hold powerful people accountable and to show the world what is happening so that the people can see. And for me, I'll never forget that is what they instilled in me, not because they taught it or they said it, but because they actually did it. And when you see it in such close proximity day in and day out for years, as I did when I was based in Gaza and then living in Gaza and coming back and covering it, that is something that stays with you. It's something that affects you profoundly. And when you see people who are that committed to the principles of journalism, it never leaves you. And you're almost kind of guilty. You almost feel a sense of guilt when you're in a much safer environment and you're perhaps facing something that is not dangerous, but you think is difficult. And you're kind of reminded of the sacrifices that other journalists have made overseas, because I think that kind of stays with you and it becomes a source of inspiration for you that you should never lose sight of what journalists, by the way, not just in Gaza, and because I know people in Gaza, but journalists all around the world. Again, journalists in Mexico who have been killed, or in the Philippines, or in various parts of Africa, or in Ukraine. Journalists are being killed, journalists are being targeted, and we've seen time and time again that this is increasingly becoming one of the most dangerous professions in the world.
Yeah. Thank you for widening the scope there. What's instinctive about that is that so often journalists do not want to be the story. That is the goal. Do not become the story. And yet there are times when you are so tied to the story because of what you've witnessed, because you're witnessing the story that gets taken out of our hands. And so there's one instance, a moment in which perhaps some would say you became part of the story, and I want to take the temperature here and ask your thoughts on that. You were working back in Gaza for NBC News, and you reported that Israel had killed 4 young boys on a beach. And I see some nods in the audience because people remember this story. And I want you to summarize what happened next, but I'm hoping you can tell us what you learned from that experience.
Yeah, it was actually in 2014. It was in the war that summer, which was one of the bloodiest wars that had happened before the genocide that we're living through now. And that was one of the more notorious incidents that had happened. There was a group of international journalists who were staying at the Dira Hotel, which is a hotel that was right on the beach in Gaza City. And, a lot of journalists were, after spending a few hours in the field every day reporting, they would come back to the hotel. It was a place where a lot of journalists were staying. It was a place where journalists can meet and gather and have a sense of safety a little bit, just because it was very well known to the Israeli authorities that international journalists were staying there. And it was also a place, because it was on the beach, that a lot of times people would come and go to the beach thinking that it might be one of the safest places in Gaza during the war. And unfortunately, on that specific day, I was returning to the hotel, and as we were making our way into the hotel, we happened to see a group of children who were playing soccer right in front of the building, in front of the hotel. And we ended up going inside the hotel. I believe the kids ended up going outside down to the beach area. And within a couple of minutes of us going inside the hotel, we heard a series of strikes that took place. And so we immediately ran out. And it didn't occur to me immediately, but after a few minutes, it was apparent that the people that were killed, the children that were killed, were the children that we had just run into on the way into the hotel. So it was a very painful moment because we immediately knew that the people that were there were children. You could physically see it. Some of the journalists physically picked up the children, or some of the photographers were able to actually document the bodies being lifted up from the sand that they were children. But it took a minute for us to process what was happening. But sadly, the narrative that was already kind of taking hold in the media outside of Gaza was that Israel carried out a strike against militants on the beach who were preparing to fire a rocket. And so, again, you were in this situation where the reporters on the ground and the international press who were seeing and documenting what had happened were competing with a lie and competing with misinformation and disinformation that had spread around the world much faster. And so it was one of those moments where you kind of realize what you're going up against, which is what you witness, what you see versus what is being spun and being sold and being told to the world outside of the actual war. And it's something that we've seen time and time again. It's not exclusive to that single moment in 2014, but it's something that has become kind of a mainstay of governments, authoritarian governments, governments who deliberately try to sow disinformation and misinformation and try to lie and try to obfuscate. So it was just a powerful reminder and a sad and tragic reminder of how that plays out.
That story is telling, I think, for a lot of people because of the fact that it's not that there was an agenda there. You happened to be there, you happened to see it, and you did what journalists do, which is report the news. And
I wasn't honestly, I wasn't
not the only one.
Yeah, I wasn't the only one there. There were actually a lot of the photographs that were taken on that day were as a result of actual international photojournalists that were there able to document it.
Right. And yet, despite the documentation that we could see with our eyes, there's still this narrative. And we're still seeing that today. We're seeing that here in 2026, which is why...
The problem is if you cast enough doubt and if you plant the seed of doubt early on, it will stay there. Yeah. And so it wasn't until, I believe, a year or two, maybe even longer, that the Israeli military came out and acknowledged that they actually had killed 4 children and acknowledged that it was a mistake. And they say it was a mistake, and they say it was an errand, or perhaps they misidentified who was on the beach and what was happening on the beach. But ultimately, they cast enough doubt about it, and no one was ever held accountable for the killing of those children.
All right, so the point here is that when doubt is cast, you are one of the ones that people look to. I know that you can see it on his face. He doesn't feel comfortable with this, but I'm saying it honestly because I've talked to people. You are one of the ones that people look to, your coverage.
I appreciate it. No, thank you. It means a lot, and it's important, and I don't take that lightly. I mean, it's a responsibility, and it weighs on me very heavily. But I will say that I always try to encourage people to diversify their news sources. I don't think that you should ever rely on one person or one organization for your information and say that is a person I'm going to believe and going to trust, because I am a human being. I make mistakes. I have my own personal biases. I have my own lived experiences. I have stories that I want to prioritize because they matter to me. And I think that's okay as long as we're transparent about it. And I try to say that to people who are my viewers, followers, listeners, whatever, is that this is what you're getting by following me, but you are not getting a complete and holistic accounting of everything that is happening at any given moment.
The final question I had for you, it's in that you made a pivot. And so from the field reporting, you went to the anchor desk. And the anchor desk is a little bit different because from there, then you went to a desk where you're allowed to share more of your opinion. You're allowed to share your analysis. Not a thing that people out in the field might feel comfortable doing.
Correct.
And so I wanted to get your take on what people should know the differences, how the media literacy is not that great always, and understanding the differences between those two things. And so what you would tell people.
Well, I would tell people that people sometimes confuse the difference between a field reporter or a correspondent who's supposed to try to give you just the facts and the events of what they're seeing and what they're witnessing or what they've exposed and what they're reporting on, versus somebody who is in my position as a perspective host, who's able to kind of look at all of the different sources of information and provide analysis, context, try to share an opinion and express a perspective based in facts. I think that is sometimes lost on people, right? Sometimes people say like, oh, I love your reporting. And the reality is like, I may not be doing as much reporting as I used to. I'm taking other people's reporting and distilling it and analyzing it in a way that I can kind of try to break it down for people. When you're in the anchor chair, you have more of the ability to command interviews, to probe questions, to interrogate certain ideas, and you can kind of shape the conversation and steer the conversation in a certain direction based on your own expertise and the position that you've earned and built.
Yeah. Ayman, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been The Take.
Thank you.